Yeah, I've had that happen more than once. I've had my life threatened before. I had someone buy drugs right in front of my face, and I said hello to him and his drug dealer, and then the next day hit him with the non-renewal of lease, and he was confused and angry.
Welcome to the Rental Property Owner and Real Estate Investor Podcast, brought to you by the Rental Property Owner Association, providing benefits and services to real estate investors and rental property owners for over 48 years. With your host, Brian Hamrick from Hamrick Investment Group.
This episode is sponsored by Green Property Management, managing everything from single-family homes to apartment complexes in the West Michigan area. Find out more at greenpropertymgt.com. Hello and welcome to episode 222. Imagine what it's like to get started in real estate investing when you have nothing. No money, no experience, and no network. Now imagine you're also in your 20s and have more student loan debt than actual capital to invest in deals. On top of that, you have a job in corporate America, but you're still broke. That is where today's guest was 8 years ago. Ryan Narus is a self-made real estate entrepreneur and accredited investor who started with nothing and now owns and operates 12 mobile home parks spanning over 1,300 units. He's the co-founder of the Archimedes Group, where he works at home, has 5 employees, and hosts his own podcast called Mobile Home Parks in Real Life. Today, Ryan is going to share why he was eager to sacrifice everything and do things others weren't willing to do so that he could live the life others only dream of. We're also going to discuss mobile home park investing and why Ryan has dedicated his business to this asset class. Ryan, welcome to the show.
Brian, I am honored to be here, and you make me sound way cooler than I think I actually am.
Well, we're going to find out. I think you're pretty cool already.
Well, thanks.
I'm mobile home park investing, fantastic asset class from what I hear, and I'm looking forward to learning more about it with you. But really, you know, the rags to riches kind of storyline that I just told, that's pretty fascinating. You started with nothing except a dream, perhaps. Tell us about that dream.
Yeah, so I'm 32 years old as of this recording, and I was given the same line I think all millennials are given. Oh, go work hard in school, you'll go to a good college, you'll get a good job, you work hard there, and then you can retire on a beach somewhere one day. And that's a lie. You know, that maybe that was true X number of years ago, and it's just old information that we've been force-fed all of our lives. But I worked really hard and stressed myself out in high school to go to Wake Forest University, good school, not Ivy League, but very good school. And then had the misfortune of graduating in 2009, which was an awful job market. But even when I did find a job, it was very unfulfilling and very ungratifying. And unfortunately not overly lucrative, right? So in other words, when you look at, 50 years ago, if you threw all your money in the stock market or you bought a house versus today and how much college costs today relative to 50 years ago, I mean, it's a different ballgame. Pensions aren't really a thing anymore. And what are you going to get? 7% in the stock market? If that's even a real number you can function off of. So it's get rich slowly. I mean, I just, beyond the wealth building aspect, I just was really unsatisfied with what my generation is kind of facing. And rather than sit back and play the victim, I went, you know what? People can tell me all they want to about what they think I can and can't do, or what the market can allow me to do, or I could just go out there and get what I want. And so, long story short, I spent probably the better part of 10 years reading any book I could read, talking to any person with a pulse, figuring out who I was, figuring out what I love doing, but not just that I love doing, like Jim Collins says in Good to Great, what is something you're passionate about, that is lucrative, and you could be the best in the world at. So preferably something niched.
At that point, real estate wasn't necessarily the thing that you were going after. You were just trying to figure out what would get you out of the kind of this corporate job market rut that you were in.
Just an absolute depression. I mean, I had 4 corporate jobs, and I found myself, each had its own life cycle as to when I would eventually be depressed and feel stuck. And yes, eventually I found it wasn't necessarily that it was real estate, because I looked at over 100 businesses to start. And it was just a question of finding the right one. And then once I found it, making major sacrifices to make it work.
Just out of curiosity, what were some of the other ideas that you came up with other than real estate?
Well, they're pretty cringeworthy, so I'm glad you asked.
Let's cringe together. Tell us what they were.
So the first and most cringeworthy was definitely one I was going to start with my best friend, which was called A Bro's Guide to Charlotte, which basically was our way of rating bars and restaurants and stuff for, single guys in their 20s. And thankfully, that was just something you talk about when you have a couple beers and never actually end up really doing anything about, because that would have gone nowhere and had been embarrassing. But other than that, I wrote a book, tried to monetize that, and I made a grand total of $19.17. So I am a paid author, but just FYI, it cost me about $200 setting up the website. So I'm definitely in the red with my book.
What kind of book was it?
So I used to sell cars, and I was a psychology major undergrad, and I figured there is definitely a market for people who want to know how to get the best price. And because I have a background in psychology, I can talk about how to get the best price and have a good experience at the car dealership, all using psychology. I was like, that's a really cool concept. And I wrote a book, and I thought I did a pretty decent job of capturing exactly that, only to realize that people don't actually want to go and buy a book and learn how to buy a good car. They just want to come to you for confirmation bias that they know how to get a good deal. So
interesting.
That didn't really go anywhere. And then the other one was, my wife is a nurse, and she is definitely a germaphobe, although I guess I can't blame anyone who's had microbiology for being a germaphobe, because it sounds there's some things you just can't unsee after you take that class. And she thinks that going to grocery stores is absolutely disgusting. So she was like, what if I could invent an insert for grocery carts so it can separate out foods and obviously not have it touch gross things that 8 million people have touched before? And so we did a little research, and we're like, there's a market for this. I can't find another product out there. We could really crush it. And then we stopped when the patent or the thing to get it designed was like 10, 20 grand. And we're like, we don't have any money. How are we going to do that for an unproven concept? And so we kind of quit. So in other words, 3 businesses of varying degrees of effort put into it. All of them eventually went dry.
At what point did you stumble on real estate, and what sold you on that idea?
2 things. So in 2009, when I couldn't find a job, I eventually went to work in car sales. So I worked in car sales for 4 years, which, by the way, anyone listening in, that has got to be one of the best jobs ever to learn important life skills, from negotiating to selling and persuading and marketing and operations, and how to be confrontational but not too confrontational, how to get good customer service. I mean, all of the above. I stumbled into that, and I'm so glad I did, for multiple reasons. But one big reason that answers your question is I sold a really rich guy a minivan, and he was an eccentric guy. And I was like, this is bizarre that this guy would be buying a minivan, because he doesn't have kids that are of the age. So I'm talking to him. I'm like, what are you doing? Like, why are you buying this? And long story short, it was for one of his businesses. And I was like, this guy's weird. But it's a weird where I want to learn more from him. And so when we were driving his trade, which was an old truck, and he was deciding whether or not he wanted to trade it in, I sat down on all of this just junky papers, like these junky papers. And I was like, why does he have all this trash? And I go to move it, and they're checks for like $1,000, $1,200, $1,500 uncashed in his name. And I'm like, dude, what are you doing? It's like that scene from Caddyshack with Chevy Chase, and they're like, it's an uncashed check for $10,000. What are you doing? And so I asked him, I'm like, what are you doing? He's like, oh man, I need to run to the bank. I have rental properties. And I went, this is something I got to do. To be able to be at the point where you're like, oh man, I got all this money sitting with trash in front pickup truck seat. I was like, that's really cool. That it's, in other words, that was my first experience meeting someone who's really successful with passive income. And then it really hit home when I found Rich Dad, Poor Dad. And then I bought my first rental property. It went horribly wrong, but I couldn't get enough of it. So I stumbled into, through reading and meeting people, I stumbled into something that I was just utterly passionate about.
So did you do any type of real estate investing before you got into mobile home parks?
Yes. So at 24 years old, I bought a 3-bedroom, 2.5-bath condo, townhome, whatever you want to call it. Moved in my 2 best friends and rented out the extra rooms to them. And in theory, that was going to cover basically my whole mortgage. And I made every mistake in the book and did not have a signed lease. And they effectively didn't take any down payment, didn't do any background checks on them. Long story short, they effectively never paid me and then moved out. And I hate to say it, but I never talked to either of them again.
Probably a good loss for you because you realized your friends were going to flake out on you.
Yeah, it's really sad. You know, it's really sad because I still love both of them, but you know, you have to surround yourself with top performing people if you want to be a top performer. And I don't think either of them have really elevated themselves much beyond where they're at this point in time. Then again, I haven't been in touch with them in a long, long time. And truth be told, it is what it is. I mean, people that you enjoy hanging out with aren't necessarily people you enjoy living with. And that was a big lesson for me. But I think the more important thing there was I got the gist, right? I got the gist of what is cash flow. I made a ton of mistakes that I learned from. I measured the risk versus reward properly. And so even though they weren't paying me, I was fine. So I didn't overbuy. And there were a lot of good lessons there that I learned. But other than doing that, I had no other experience in real estate before I bought my first mobile home park. So I had extremely limited experience, if you can even really call that experience.
So tell us about that first mobile home park. I mean, most people start with single family. Maybe they buy a duplex or a 3-unit. You went from house hacking right to mobile home park. How did that happen?
People are going to give you the best advice that they can give you, knowing what they know. And the truth of the matter was, myself and my business partner, Ian, we are big networkers. We love talking to quite literally anyone with a pulse. If you're unemployed all the way up to a CEO of a Fortune 500 company, we want to talk to you. Even if we don't think we're going to learn anything or get anything out of it, we don't care. And the truth of the matter was, we realized because we were 20-somethings with no experience and a very limited network, that it was going to be really, really hard and to really scale up a portfolio of single-family homes or duplexes or quad or triplexes, because it's going to require so much capital, and then the returns aren't overly great. So what we kind of realized is, okay, well, what else can we do? And the idea of buying a mobile home came up, because you can buy one for $5,000, you know, and then rent it for not that much less. And so we were like, well, that's interesting. And then one of Ian's coworkers said, well, if you're going to buy a mobile home, why don't you just buy the whole mobile home park? And so Ian, and I got to credit him with this, he basically was like, you know what? Why am I shooting so low? Why don't we just go and figure this out? And that's exactly what we did. So we took almost an entire year to identify our first mobile home park, identify the proper investors to partner with. And we went to 40 banks for a deal that was an absolute home run. I mean, absolute home run. We got an unsolicited offer for several $1 million more than what we had bought it for several years later. Debt coverage ratio was outstanding. And we went to 40 banks with this deal that overperformed, and we got 40 rejections.
Why is that? Why did you get 40 rejections?
Every single bank told us no for several reasons. First and foremost, I was 29 years old. Ian was 25. I had my MBA. Great. So what? You're still risky. Banks just don't like mobile home parks for a lot of reasons. First and foremost, they're usually undevelopable land. So in other words, if you default, the land isn't, usually not going to get a covered land play there. If the mobile homes are part of the deal, great, that can be used as collateral, but they're depreciating assets and they tend to rack up big bills to rehab and then get released. And you're leasing them to tenants with a higher default rate. So in other words, from a banker's perspective, there's a lot to not like about it. And also, because I had no money, and the bank was like, okay, fine, we'll do this, but you have to post collateral. And then they're like, your collateral is your Honda Fit? Dude, forget it. You tell a cool story. Former car salesman, MBA, Wake Forest University, wrote a book. Great. Where's my money when you default on this loan? And our investor partners were out of California. And long story short, we had to go to them with our tail between our legs and basically be like, dude, we can't get a loan on this. Do you guys have any contacts? And they had to pull a favor at one of their banks, and we got the deal bought. But the lesson there was, if you're going to sign up recourse debt, they've got to be in the same state. And if they're not in the same state, they got to be awfully darn close, because California and North Carolina are thousands of miles apart. So these are just kind of lessons that we kind of learned through the process of entrepreneurship. Is there's going to be a lot of times when people and entities are going to tell you no, but you have to keep going, because if you really, in my experience in doing this for 5 years, the people I've talked to that haven't gotten anywhere literally just quit. And the people who are successful, it's not that they're smarter or harder working or this, that, or the other thing. It's just that they didn't stop.
Yeah, they didn't take no as an answer.
Yeah, they just kept going. And I learned that at the car dealership. And thankfully, Ian is just as stubborn as I am. So he was like, okay, another bank said no. Great. Let's see how many banks will say no before we finally get one that says yes. And then all of a sudden now, geez, I check my LinkedIn and it's like every day a new banker's like, hey, call me for your debt business. I'm like, dude, where were you 5 years ago?
I'd like to take a moment to tell you about Green Property Management. Not only do they manage everything from single-family homes to apartment complexes in the West Michigan area, they also manage my entire portfolio. So I can tell you from personal experience that their unique flat fee management style is worth a closer look. If you feel that your property isn't operating to its fullest potential, then Green Property Management can help you take a holistic approach that will save you money, eliminate your headaches, and increase your net income. And if you're a property manager interested in applying Green Property Management's model, give them a call at 1-866-95-GREEN or visit them on the web at greenpropertymgt.com. There's a couple of things there I want to follow up on. Let's start with your investors out of California. How much money were you raising, and how did you're in North Carolina, I take it, Charlotte? Mm-hmm. How did you find investors out of California, and how much money did you need from them?
They had their own podcast, and they were very easy to find. They had a fund, and they did their own syndication, and basically they positioned themselves as mobile home park operators. So it was a joint venture. And so that way I didn't have to technically raise any money. They handled all the capital. And so from our perspective with no money, we went, look, we found a good deal for you. So there's three parts of any commercial real estate deal. You got to find a willing seller. You have to have money for that willing seller. And then someone actually has to operate the park after you buy the asset, right? So in other words, they were going to bring the money, we were going to bring the deal, and then we were going to partner together on the operations. So in other words, you give us a finder's fee and cut us in on the operations here. We'll learn under you because you're experienced operators, and you'll get the deal done because you have your own fund with millions of dollars in it. So it was, in our opinion, a great match. And so that's how we got our first deal done. Turned out it didn't exactly go that way. We left on good terms with them, but they kind of saw it a little bit differently, and that's fine because then we had some cash in our pocket and we got another partner for our second and third and so on deals from there.
Did you sell that first deal when you got the unsolicited offer?
We took the unsolicited offer and went to them and said, hey, it's been X number of years. Can you just buy us our equity out and we part ways as friends? And they're like, yeah, sure.
How did you find that first deal?
We actually got that from a pocket listing from a broker, which is an interesting story in and of itself because most brokers did not want to talk to us, period. In the mobile home park space, there's a lot of hype. And because there's a lot of hype, there's a lot of people who want to get into it. Because there's a lot of people who want to get into it, brokers and owners get bombarded with a bunch of folks who really, truly have no idea what they're doing, myself included. I definitely was one of those. And so a lot of my friends now that are brokers and owners, they talk to me totally differently now because I've gotten scale and I've done some, in my opinion, pretty cool things. And so even some of them, one of my friends, Chris, I mean, he'll tell you point blank, I screened your calls starting out. I thought you weren't real. I am so sorry now to see where you guys are at versus when you first started calling me. And I'm like, Chris, dude, it's not a big deal. I would have done the same thing. I would have wasted your time back then. I couldn't perform. I mean, I told you, 40 banks, 40 rejections. I could not have bought a mobile home park on my own back then. So don't worry about it, Chris. And anyway, so in other words, finding a broker to give me a pocket listing back then sounds really, really difficult. But here's how we did it. We found a broker that was new and a broker that didn't have a finance background. And Ian has his background in finance and worked for an REIT. So as an analyst, so he's outstanding at underwriting. So he was helping her underwrite.
Ian is your partner?
Yeah, he's their co-founder for Archimedes Group. So he was adding value to this broker because the broker struggled with the financial part, and they were buddies too. So it just helped that they just had good chemistry. So in other words, because he brought value to her, she brought value to him. So she brought this deal and she said, hey, can you help me underwrite this? This was X number of deals they looked at together. Can you help me underwrite this? Here's what the listing price is. And Ian was like, wow, do you mind if I just buy this? She's like, yeah, totally. So in other words, I think the real lesson there is, yes, when you're starting out, brokers will not call you back. They're going to screen your calls. But if you can find someone, and not just find someone, if you can pump them full of value, you can do something for them and not expect anything in return, because we really didn't, then all of a sudden that opens up a door that wasn't necessarily there for anyone else.
Can you give us some details on this first mobile home park that you bought? What were you looking for? What did this have to offer? And let's get into a little bit of the whole theory behind mobile home park investing as well.
Sure. So it was an 89 lot community right outside of Durham, North Carolina. Lot rents were a little low. Roads were atrocious. Needed some infill of homes. Really basic though. It is city water, city sewer. Not overly difficult from an operational standpoint as is. Moving in homes would prove very difficult, but it was a really good first opportunity for a lot of reasons.
How did you know how to validate this property, like as far as utilities? You talk about the road conditions. How did you come up with a budget for how much money you'd have to put into this and what the opportunity was and the upside value?
Sure. So first and foremost, they dump on you with financials and bills and whatnot. And you can go through and say what the water bills are, if it has water, or when the last time the rent was raised, blah, 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 blah. So in other words, we took all of that information. We called the sheriff. We called other local mobile home parks. We figured out who was paying, who wasn't paying. And basically through this process, what we've figured out is that the lot rents were low. So in other words, you go in, you repave the roads. We got a bunch of quotes. I think we got 3 quotes total. And so in other words, you have a budget, say 80 grand or whatever that number was, to repave the roads. And then it needed tree work. Couple knuckleheads needed to go because they weren't paying. So in other words, you say, okay, I can increase the rent by this much. I can pave the roads, invest in infrastructure, cut down trees, whatever. So that way I can justify a rent raise. So I'm not just raising rents just because I'm trying to find arbitrage within the market. You know, I have a legitimate reason to raise the rents. And you swap out bad pairs for good pairs, and then you can get you have an in-place cap rate, and then you have a projected cap rate in, say, year 2 or 3 or whenever. For us, since it was a 65% loan to value loan with a balloon around year 3, it was one of those things where we got to perform by year 3. And then obviously you refinance or you sell at that point in time. And unbeknownst to us, mobile home parks in the last 5 years, really in the last, say, 2 or 3 years, it's just utterly exploded. I mean, just utterly exploded. And we've got offers on we're not actively part of the park anymore, but I think they have offers now for double what we paid for it because of the market right now for mobile home parks. So in other words, there's even things involved that it's just you're catching it at the right timing. So back then, we probably would never have guessed it'd be worth double what we bought it for. But at the time, with where the rents were at, where we thought we could take them to, and with good quotes in hand, we could really make a budget and basically decide, okay, what type of cap rate do we want to hit? What kind of leverage are we going to have? What IRR are we going to hit with a 3-year maturity? On and on and on.
You got into mobile home park investing because you were looking to buy rentals with your partner. And you were thinking, well, we could buy mobile homes for $5,000, $10,000. And that's what led you into thinking, well, why don't we just buy the whole park? I've talked about mobile home park investing on the show before with other guests who are doing it. And, I think I've probably listened to that podcast you were listening to 5 years ago. And the fundamentals of mobile home park investing are pretty compelling. I mean, you don't actually have to own the mobile home. You own the pad that you rent out. Is that correct?
It is. And you know what the funny thing of it is got probably one of the sexiest stories in terms of really most multifamily and even commercial real estate until you drill down into the weeds of the operations. And then it's a nightmare.
Okay, let's take the sexy story. I want to hear the sexy story. And
sure.
Then I want you to fill us in on what the nightmare potential is as well.
Sexy story is, hey, look, you own the dirt. It's like a parking lot for homes. Default rate is extremely low. Demand for affordable housing is extremely high. It costs $5,000 to move a home. So in other words, you have a huge barrier to exit for these homeowners. So you really have a captive audience. So they have nowhere to move. It's expensive to move because they're really not developing out any new ones. And they've been owned by mom and pops. It's a really highly fragmented industry. And a lot of times mom and pops, they build the property, they know the tenants. Sometimes they have dinner with them and they're really close friends with them. So they feel really bad raising the rents. So in other words, you have this kind of arbitrage where rent should be $500 a month and they're $250. And people in the parks, they can't go anywhere because it's expensive to move their home. And worst case scenario, they just sell it to someone else who's like, yeah, I'll pay $500 a month to live here because an apartment's $1,200. So I get to own it. It's mine. I have a yard. I don't share a wall with a neighbor. I can have a dog. And I'm paying less than half of what the market is for an apartment. Dude, sign me up all day long. So in other words, the macroeconomics are incredible. The microeconomics are incredible. And because in theory, if you don't own any of the homes and it's direct build, city water, city sewer, hopefully city trash as well, all of a sudden, well, what do you really got to do? You collect the rents, you enact a no pay, no stay type policy. A lot of times, if you're just collecting rents and it's a well-oiled machine, you don't really need to pay up for a really sophisticated property manager. And you can buy it really cheap because who's talking about mobile home parks? Wall Street certainly wasn't 5 years ago, or at least not to the degree they are now. So yeah, there's a lot to be extremely compelling from a sexy pitch standpoint.
I love that pitch. I've not invested in mobile home parks myself, but from those fundamentals you just mentioned, they seem like a great investment. So what's the ugly truth?
Here's why it's actually not sexy at all. First and foremost, banks don't want to touch these for the most part. And because they don't, that means there's a really strong likelihood you're going to have to take out recourse debt. And also because of this sexy pitch, now everybody in the world wants to do mobile home parks. So everyone in the world has a database and is mailing mobile home park owners, these mom and pops, and calling them. And these folks are getting, understandably, very frustrated with all the attention that they're getting out of nowhere. And because of that, now they all think they're sitting on solid gold. So prices have just, if you look at NKF, they come out with reports quarterly, and the last several ones have basically said manufactured housing is basically trading just a few basis points higher than apartments. So really this idea that, oh, there's 10 caps everywhere, that's absolutely not the case anymore. So in other words, pricing that's done. And then from an operational, so beyond just debt and pricing, from an operational standpoint, here's a really valid question. Someone owns their own home and they stop paying you and they don't sell their home to someone else and they just leave. What do? You can't touch that. That home does not belong to you. And it is on your plot of land. Now, all of a sudden, not only do you have bad debt because they're not paying, but you also have a home that you can't remove and replace with another home. So what do? Well, in apartments, you can hire a third-party manager who they'll go in and they'll handle all this stuff because they have the skills and it's lucrative enough. Well, if you're paying someone 5% of the gross revenue and the lot rent's, say, $300, that's $15 a home per month, or let's say an apartment is $1,000 a month, that's obviously a whole lot more money if you do the math. So $50 versus $15 per unit. Why would a third-party property manager want to spend a $35 difference per unit, quote unquote unit, for something that's a lot more difficult? And not only is it a lot more difficult, but the tenant base is a lot more difficult to screen. So in other words, you have to be really, really good with lease up in terms of really understanding how to market to folks who would want to live in a mobile home, because a lot of folks don't want to live in mobile homes, period. So in other words, you have a really specific type of buyer and a really specific type of person to fit this. But because this is affordable housing, you really need to sharpen your pencil in terms of knowing exactly what to screen for and what not to screen for. Why do you say yes to this person with a bad credit score but no to this person with a bad credit score? So in other words, it requires a higher level of understanding who's going to default and who's not, more so than an apartment complex where you just, all right, evict them, get them out, fix it up, get the next one in. So in other words, from an operational standpoint, it's a mess and there's no help. So in other words, there's not a third-party person out there. And so the trap that a lot of people have been getting caught in is they hear this really sexy pitch, they go out there and they end up buying a bunch. And then I'll give you another really good one to kind of end it. Infrastructure is not nearly as easy as you think it is. Yeah, sure, septics, we all know they have issues, wells, they have their issues, but people don't realize that city water and city sewer can also be nightmares. I'll give you a good, for example, not one of my properties currently collects at 100%. So we do the sub-meters and bill back. I think best case scenario, you get about 80%. Now, that's probably because somewhere in my park, there's a leak or a meter is running slow. In other words, if you underwrite a deal going, oh yeah, I'm just going to pass 100% of the water through, best case scenario, you're hitting 80, maybe if you're lucky, 90% of what your master meter is picking up versus your home's. And then on top of that, if someone leaves, they're not paying their water bill on the way out. So in other words, from an infrastructure standpoint, it can be a nightmare. And from a standpoint of, oh yeah, look at this sexy pitch, I'll go raise an 8% preferred return, 50-50 structure, pay back all my investors at refi, and then I'll have 50% ownership. I'll put up very little money. But then you don't realize, like, first off, you got to get that financed, and then all this stuff can go wrong. And then also, you have to hit that pref. So in other words, and then if you don't want to, if you can't find someone to run your parks for you because there's a lack of third-party managers, you got to do it yourself. And a lot of folks don't want to do what I did, which is move to your mobile home park and live in your mobile home park and meet the tenants face-to-face. So that's kind of how I have built up my own property management company organically. So in other words, yeah, it really sexy pitch. But when you drill down, oh my goodness, it is a lot of folks that I know that own apartments and mobile home parks go, my mobile home parks When they're bad, they are so much harder than my apartments.
So thank you for sharing that. That's you don't hear that quite so often. But I want to touch really quickly on some of the things you just mentioned.
Sure.
Really quickly here, recourse financing. What do you mean by that for our listeners who don't know what that is?
Sure. So basically what that means is if you don't pay, the bank's coming for all your stuff. So for bigger loans, you can have non-recourse and quote unquote bad boy carve outs, which basically means, hey, we're only going to come after your 401k, your house, your car, whatever, if we find malice here. So for example, CMBS is famous for having the quote unquote bad boy carve out. Well, the thing is, when you can't qualify for something like a CMBS loan or a really more attractive debt facility, you basically have to go to local banks. And these local banks are basically going to go, okay, well, if you don't pay me, I get the property and I get your 401k,
they come after you for everything until they got their money back. Fair housing laws. Do you have to comply with those?
Oh, absolutely.
Okay. So when you talk about why would you lease to one person versus another person, you always have to take into account fair housing rules.
Everyone, I go over it with all my employees because you have to be extremely careful. And not only that, when you're dealing with volume of people reaching out to you anytime you have a listing for an available unit or available lot, there are people out there who understand the fair housing laws, and what they try to do is catch you or your employees saying something you should not be saying. Then they will record that conversation, and then they will threaten you with a lawsuit and try to settle out of court. And thankfully, I've never had to run into that before, but I have heard rumblings of that. So yes, you absolutely need to be extremely careful and abide by fair housing laws regardless of what you're in.
Okay. And when you have a unit that's not paying or you have a problem with the resident there, can you evict? And does that mean you have to tow the home away as well?
So there are companies, depending on what state you're in, you can tow it away like a car parked in the wrong spot. So yes, that is an option in some states. What I like to do is, because I literally sleep on my properties, not so much anymore, but when I started out and didn't have any money and I had to make a major sacrifice, I actually moved into one of my properties and lived there to cut expenses. And it's a long story, but because what I learned by having to do that is I learned that if you just communicate with people and you are firm but respectful, what you'll realize is a lot of times you can work with folks. A lot of times you can help them find a buyer. You can basically broker a sale and just not take a commission. And that way you can help pick your incoming resident. And so you don't get stuck with a drug dealer or a criminal.
When you say you be firm but respectful, let's say you do have a drug dealer in one of the homes. How do you handle that?
Yeah, I've had that happen more than once. I've had my life threatened before. I had someone buy drugs right in front of my face. And I said hello to him and his drug dealer. And then the next day hit him with the non-renewal of lease, and he was confused and angry. So bizarre things happen, but yes. So there's many ways you can get people out. The best is probably a non-renewal of lease. So I err on month-to-month leases. And the reason being is in the states that I am involved in, basically I can go and say, hey, your lease is up. Your contract said you were an auto renew for a month-to-month lease until I basically opted to cancel. And I've been in court more than once and looked at the magistrate judge with the person I was non-renewing in the room, and they go, oh, I had a dog, or I did this, or I did that, and that's not fair that he's kicking me out for that. And the judge will look at my piece of paper and my contract and look at them, and he'll go, I don't see anything on this piece of paper about a dog or this or that. He basically just said your contract's expired and you didn't leave. So unless you want to talk about that, I'm siding with him and you're out.
Wow. So that's how it goes in North Carolina, huh?
North Carolina, South Carolina, Georgia. I'm hopefully going to buy one in Tennessee here in the next couple months. I've been in Florida as well. At least down in the Southeast, yep, you can non-renew someone. And genuinely speaking, when you hit someone with a non-renewal, you usually don't want to do that because it's a pain in the butt if you actually win and then they abandon it and blah-da-dee-da. Usually you just do that to get them to come to the negotiation table. Hey, all right, fine. You'll buy my home from me. You'll connect me with another buyer. I'll pay you half right now and the next half in 2 weeks when I get my next paycheck. So in other words, the art is really in the collections piece of it. And to be a very good operator, you really need a strong finger on on the pulse of your property. Because if you really truly think this is mailbox money, it's not. And also, you will get burned and hard, because eventually, if you do no pay, no stay, and you don't do all of the things I just discussed, you're going to have a bunch of abandoned homes on your property that you cannot remove and you cannot sell, because that does not belong to you. So, yeah, it can be an absolute nightmare if you don't really know what you're doing.
So it sounds like you're a very hands-on property manager, and I know you have at least 5 of these mobile home parks. As you just said, you've actually lived at some of these parks. Talk about that. Were you forced into this situation where you had to be more hands-on, and that's why you moved in? And how active are you still today?
Absolutely was forced. So I had effectively I had $30,000 to start this company and $60,000 plus in student loan debt. So I effectively started with negative. And when you're making good money at a Fortune 500 bank, and your friends live a certain lifestyle, and your wife is used to a certain lifestyle, and you're looking at how much money you can, even a 10% return on $30,000, it's $3,000 a year. You can't replace your income doing that. So in other words, what I realized is the only way to get more money coming in is to monetize my business. So in other words, most people just want to do the underwriting and do the due diligence and find deals and talk about deals. And then they buy one, they plant their flag, they move on. Just let a third party company run it. Well, what we realized is no one wants to actually run mobile home parks. We could run our own and pay ourselves that salary. So in other words, we have a budget. And if our biggest beef is, dude, we can't eat, so how do we get full time? Go manage the property on your own. Oh man, my middle-class lifestyle, it's not going to allow me to afford it. Great, go move into a mobile home. You have that, your rent's free. And your property can pay for the electricity, utilities, blah, blah, blah. So that's what we did. So for 14 months, I moved into a double wide that we had at our La Costa property, and I was the property manager, myself and Ian. We switched off every other week. It was really tough. It was a big sacrifice. Took a massive pay cut on my money coming in, but I saw absolutely no other way. And I have to tell you, Brian, making nearly $100,000 a year in corporate America and being utterly depressed and overweight, air quotes, overweight, because I'm a pretty skinny guy as is, and to literally go and live in a mobile home park, which I had never set a foot in a mobile home park until about 5 years ago. So I never lived that because I'm used to a middle-class lifestyle. 4 hours away from my wife and all my friends, working crazy hours. I'm talking 12 plus hours. Major sacrifice, getting yelled at for really, really stupid things. Like, the kids are loud next door. I'm going to yell at you for a half hour. Okay, I'll see you later. Like, ma'am, I have work to do here, stuff that I think normal people would really go, man, that's really beneath me. To do all of that, I got such an amazing education on how to actually operate a mobile home park. I was consuming the product I was selling, so I learned things that I never would have learned. Like, what does it sound like in the middle of a thunderstorm? What does it feel like on 4th of July at 9 p.m. when people are shooting off fireworks? These things, these insights I gained by actually being there made me a much better underwriter. And so I start seeing, I've got 6 properties under contract right now. And the thing of it is, everyone complains to me about not being able to find deals. And the thing is, I now know what a good deal is because I understand how to underwrite because I lived it. And that's probably, to me, the biggest takeaway in all of this is, if you want to get really good at something, you need to make a major sacrifice. You need to bet big on yourself. And what you'll find is that even though you're working crazy hours, living on a blow-up mattress with really shoddy air conditioning, shivering, and they call it hot Atlanta. It is not hot Atlanta in the middle of the winter in Atlanta in a double wide with bad heating and air. You need to live that moment, because I got to tell you, I was so stinking happy. So happy. I lost 15 pounds and I didn't change a thing about my lifestyle in terms of working out or eating right. I just wasn't depressed anymore. In fact, I was the opposite. I was so excited to work for less than half of the pay with no benefits and recourse debt over my head. And thankfully that honeymoon has really not faded away yet. I absolutely love what I do. So those listening in, I really hope that whatever it is that you're looking at in real estate, if you really love it, you'll find a way to monetize it. You'll find that, you take a major pay cut on your salary, but all of a sudden, all those things you were buying weren't actually making you happy. And chasing your dream makes you way happier than having a nicer car, country club membership, or whatever you're doing. So, yeah, there's kind of a lot to unravel there, but.
Yeah. Are you still living at your parks, or have you moved on from that?
So thankfully, after selling out of my positions in 3 of my 12 and refinancing several of them, I have enough cash to reinvest on my own. And also, like you mentioned in the intro, I'm an accredited investor now. So I have the cash to buy my own, and I can live at home now, which is nice. I still only pay myself $35,000 a year on purpose, because what happens when money hits my personal bank account is I tend to spend it. So if it just never goes there, I'm not going to spend it on something I don't really need. So I keep that fire behind myself. But yeah, absolutely. I have a wonderful blow-up mattress, and when I need to go and sleep on my properties, I do it. But what I've learned is I really need to own something that I can drive to, do what I got to do, and drive back in the same day. And not only that, I also have employees now. So yeah, I mean, I still spend a ton of time on my properties. I was just at one of them earlier today, drove home to have lunch, and obviously do the podcast with you. Tomorrow I'm going to go to one. I mean, I'm almost in my properties every single day, speaking with tenants, handling issues, and I'm starting to outsource more of that to employees. But there's a part of me that will always want to be on site, because I think that gives me a serious competitive advantage. So I need to keep doing that.
And you still enjoy it?
Oh, I love it. I'm so lucky to be able to confidently say I know exactly what I want to be when I grow up.
As we wrap it up, Ryan, what advice would you have for people who are currently in the same position you were in 8 years ago? Student debt, starting with nothing, no network, no money. What would you say to them to give them courage and inspiration?
Really, it all comes, if you were to ask me what would I do differently, because I get that question all the time. What do you do? What would you do differently? I would really just do more of it, because I want what I have. I really just need to be focused on being more grateful, because there's not really much more that I want with my life. So to get to that point where you want what you have, it really for me came down to 4 things: learning, networking, self-assessing, and sacrificing. Learning, first and foremost, you pick up any book you can. You'll find some books are not worth your time. Some books will literally change your life. 4-Hour Workweek, Rich Dad, Poor Dad, Mastery by Robert Greene. These books literally changed my life. You've got to find a way to find time to read and learn. And then networking. You would be shocked what you can learn from someone who's totally unemployed and can never do anything for you ever in your entire life, if you just give that person time. I've sat down with 3-4 Fortune 500 CEOs now, and I've learned great lessons from them. But the truth of the matter is, I've also learned some incredible lessons from folks I never would have guessed that I would have learned from. And the thing of it is, the more people you meet, the more you will learn. And also, I got 40 rejections from 40 banks, but I also got the deal bought because of someone that I knew. So in other words, you've got to have a strong network, and it takes a long time to build it. And sometimes you really have to take a shotgun approach, which is what I did, and I'm glad I did it. And then self-assessing. What I learned at the 4 years of selling cars is year 1, I loved it. Year 2, I enjoyed it. Year 3, I hated it. And year 4 was absolute torture. So you have to really know who you are and look at over 100 businesses like I did, and know what you're going to really be passionate about and is also going to have staying power, because the car dealership did not have staying power for me. So in other words, and it takes years, I'm still learning about myself today. So in other words, that's a really extremely important piece, because like I mentioned earlier, most people that are successful that I know, they just didn't quit. They weren't smarter. They weren't harder working. They just did not quit. And if you don't absolutely love what you do, you will find a time to quit. And then the last part is sacrifice. You absolutely have to do something crazy like I did, which is take out recourse debt over your head. Stop spending like as much as you're spending. Go and literally live in a mobile home and get yelled at by little Miss Janice once a day for something ridiculous, right? And do things beneath you and make a big bet on yourself. And the reason why I want to say all of that is because what you'll find about what I just said is nothing is really that sexy about what I said. Nothing is really that you have to be Michael Jordan to pull that off. These are things that if you do 15 minutes to an hour a day, once a day, compounded over years, you'll look back and be like, oh my gosh, how did I do that? Because if I look at myself now, like if I were to tell myself 5 years ago when I started this business, where I'm at today, I would have said, I don't believe you. And here's why. Because I wrote down what I thought I couldn't do on day one of mobile home parks. And I have shattered every single thing that I thought I couldn't do. So you can do more in 5 years than you think. And you probably will overestimate. Like I think Bill Gates says that you'll overestimate what you can do in a year and underestimate what you can do in 10.
Great advice. Thank you for that. Ryan, I've really appreciated listening to you tell your story about basically starting with nothing to the point where you are today with how many mobile home parks do you have?
So we've bought 12. We currently own 9 and I have 6 under contract, although I don't expect to buy all 6. So
okay.
By the time this goes live, I might have close to 15 or more.
Fantastic. Well, thank you for again, and congratulations on your success.
Thanks.
And also, I appreciate you just sharing both the positives and then the nitty gritty of actually owning mobile home parks.
Well, Brian, like I mentioned to you when I first reached out to you, I really enjoy your podcast. And a big reason why is because I didn't have something like your podcast when I started 5 years ago, and really more than that. And anyone listening in, I think you really need to listen to podcasts like Brian's. And the reason being is there will be nuggets in there that are absolute game changers. And if you like what I've said, I have my own podcast. Maybe you don't want to do mobile home parks, but one thing that I do is I give my time and I don't expect anything in return. I'm not selling anything. I'm not raising any money. I literally just want to help people for 2 reasons. Number one, so you too can escape corporate America, because at least for me, I was depressed there. And if I can help you escape, that's great. And number 2, I do a lot of charity work. And if I can help you escape and then you'll go and help charity work too, oh my goodness. Like that's how I want to be remembered when I'm dead, is Ryan made this world a better place because he was here. And so if you've liked what I've had to say, by all means, reach out to me. I think I'm the only Ryan Narus in the world. So if you want to literally just Google me, my LinkedIn is probably the best way to get in touch with me. My last name is just Narus. And like I said, if I've inspired you even slightly, by all means, reach out to me. I don't care if you're unemployed or the CEO of a Fortune 500 company. I want to talk to you. I want to help you, and I don't expect a thing in return.
How else would people get a hold of you if they wanted to?
My website, ArchimedesGRP.com. It's got links to all my YouTube videos, my how-to videos, my blog, my podcasts. Like Tupac says, my favorite rapper, I ain't hard to find.
Great. Well, thanks again, Ryan. It's been a pleasure talking with you.
It's been an honor to be here. Thanks for having me.
I want to thank everybody for listening to this episode. I'm your host, Brian Hamrick from Hamrick Investment Group, and you can find out more about me by going to higinvestor.com. That's higinvestor.com. And you can also ask questions and join us on Facebook by going to RPOA, Rental Property Owner and Real Estate Investor Podcast. This episode was sponsored by Green Property Management, managing everything from single-family homes to apartment complexes in the West Michigan area. Find out more at greenpropertymgt.com.
You've been listening to the Rental Property Owner and Real Estate Investor Podcast, brought to you by the Rental Property Owner Association. You can find out more at rpoaonline.org. If you enjoyed this podcast, please go to iTunes to subscribe, rate, and review.